Fabulous. Good morning, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us. My name is Lisa Shulock. I'm with the Philadelphia Energy Authority. And I'm about to share my screen here with you all. Great. So we are here to talk about Philadelphia's new building tune-up mandate and also how CPACE might fit into that. So with me today, we have Zach Greene, and he's going to talk about the newly issued final regulations for building tune-up. He's with the City of Philadelphia Office of Sustainability. Dave Ferro is with Pennoni, and he's going to give us the engineer's perspective on what's involved with tune-up and also some of the capital improvements that can be made as an alternative pathway to meeting the tune-up regulations. And Steve Bevilacqua is going to talk more in depth about CPACE. I'm going to give a very broad overview in a second. And then we'll bring it around back to me. I'm going to talk about a few of the Philadelphia CPACE program specifics, and then we will have time for questions. And I encourage everybody to use the Q&A box for submitting questions throughout, and we will get to as many of them, if not all of them, as we can. So as I mentioned, I'm with the Philadelphia Energy Authority, and we are a quasi-governmental organization that goal is to use clean energy as a tool for economic development, job creation, and alleviating poverty and improving public health. It's not a small task, but we're definitely making progress. So CPACE, what is CPACE? It's a financing tool. It provides long-term funding for energy efficiency, for water conservation projects, as well as for renewable energy projects. Those projects have to show that they're going to have measurable savings, and there's a special assessment. So instead of getting a loan, normally a loan is connected to the property owner. In this case, it's connected to the property itself, which has some significant benefits, and we're going to go into what those benefits are in a little while. So I'm going to, with no further ado, and I'm going to pass this on to Zach, who's going to take us through the building tune-up requirements. Thank you, Zach.
Thanks, everyone. Lisa, if you could stop sharing your screen, I can put up my slides. Perfect. Hold on one second. All right, so can everyone see my slides? Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Zach Greene. I'm the climate advisor to the city through the American Cities Climate Challenge. As Lisa mentioned, I'll be talking a little bit about the building tune-up policy and the recently passed regulations. This is a pretty in-depth policy, and I only have about 10 minutes to speak to it. So, forgive me as I go through it. There's a lot more to cover, and there'll be a lot more information coming out in the near future. So just a quick background. This policy was really highlighted as kind of the next step to our benchmarking ordinance that is currently in place. The policy itself was passed by City Council in late 2019 and signed into law in December. We spent basically the beginning more than half of this year developing regulations with a group of stakeholders, and on October 23rd, those regulations were finalized. So this policy is in effect. We're working on implementation now, and actually the regulations are ready now for folks to take and run with and comply. I've included links here for the legislation and regulations. We'll also be publishing some things through the Office of Sustainability in the coming weeks. So you'll have more opportunities to see what those regulations are, to review the legislation, so just stay tuned for those. Really the idea behind this policy is reducing the carbon footprint in our building sector, because building and industry are the two largest, is the largest sector in our carbon footprint. So we're hoping that this policy will reduce about 5% of emissions in the first compliance cycle. So who must comply? So this policy is directed at all non-residential buildings with indoor floor space of at least 50,000 square feet. I've included here a list of buildings that are included and also those that are not. I think one of the key aspects here is, unlike our benchmarking ordinance, this does not include multifamily. So that's one of the big differences there. Otherwise, these are the buildings that will have to comply. On the right here, you'll see our compliance deadlines. These are based on building size. And so you can see here, there's a tiered system. One of the things to note, and this was included in the regulations, is that due to COVID, we are allowing for buildings in that first compliance tier, buildings larger than 200,000 square feet, to apply for a 6 months extension. And again, some of these things are still TBD in terms of like how to do that, but we will be putting it out there. So buildings will have to actively apply for that, and they will be granted it if they apply. So again, we'll have a link for that soon. But I really want to talk about how to comply. So there are really two main ways. One is to conduct a tune-up, and the other is to get an exemption. And what we'll be focusing on today is the tune-up, and then the high performance options here that you see as the other alternative to completing a tune-up. So first, let's just dive into what a tune-up is. So a tune-up basically requires an assessment of existing systems and controls, and then corrective actions to bring them up to a good state of repair if they're not in that, if there's any deficiencies found. So right now there's 5 sections in what a tune-up would assess. It is a set of assessment items. So it's a prescriptive list that we have. So basically you go through each of those, do the assessment, see if things are working effectively, and then make any changes if not. So we have to look at HVAC systems, lighting systems, water systems, and also the building envelope. A tune-up specialist is who will be performing these assessments, and we've defined that as someone who has a professional engineer or certified energy manager credentials and at least 7 years of experience and education combination. We will be requesting that, or requiring actually, that folks apply to the Office of Sustainability to become qualified tune-up specialists and to be able to submit a tune-up report. One thing to note is that it's an objective application. You just have to prove that, and we'll give you a check mark, and you're able to sign off on reports. Buildings that comply through a tune-up will have to use a third party to act as this tune-up specialist. And again, that specialist will be the one that actually goes and does the assessment. And then at the end of it, it signs the final report that is then sent back to the Office of Sustainability. If that tune-up specialist does find deficiencies in any of the systems that they review, in-house staff or contracted service providers can actually complete the corrective actions to bring them up to a good state of repair. So again, the tune-up specialist has to be a third party. The corrective actions can be undertaken by in-house staff. Important thing to note here about the tune-ups is that this just relates to base building systems, so no tenant-owned systems are included. And also, this doesn't include some industrial processes or any specialized equipment. We're not talking about having to do anything with like internet servers or things like that. We're talking about base building HVAC systems and things of that nature. So just to give you a quick flavor of what would be in a tune-up, here is one of the tune-up actions that is required. This is around reviewing HVAC equipment schedules, reviewing set points, basically making sure that those are working to support the actual occupancy and use of the building. And that's a really critical point in that we're not trying to tell building owners how to manage their buildings or what their occupancy should look like. What we're saying is, do the set points, does the schedules reflect the current use of that building? If not, because of shifts that potentially happen, how can we adjust those to make your building more efficient? One of the things I want to note here as well is that you can see a required or voluntary column here. Not all corrective actions are required. The assessments are required for everything, but building owners only have to implement a select number of the actions depending on, again, their complexity. We know that certain elements in the tune-up will require inspection of different elements that there's multiple of across a building, like grills and coils and things like that. Tune-up specialists only have to assess 15% of those across a building and get a representative sample. So you don't have to have the tune-up specialists going and looking at everything in a building. So that's a tune-up. Again, we have a prescriptive list that's actually accessible online right now. We're working on a more formalized workbook, but folks can use the current exhibit, which is on our regulations page, to basically use that as a pathway to completing their tune-up. what I want to jump to now is the high performance options. So, if your building is a high performer, you actually don't have to conduct a tune-up. You can just provide documentation to the city and skip the tune-up piece. I'm just going to go down here through the options, and they're really based on the timeline of when those actions occurred, because that's really how we judge whether or not you can be exempt from a tune-up. So, within 3 years of your compliance deadline that you have as your building, you can provide kind of this whole slew of things, including a gold rating or a platinum rating under LEED's building operations and maintenance, net zero certification. If you've participated and completed either a utility retro commissioning program or an alternative retro or recommissioning procedure. Another piece is if you've demonstrated energy savings of at least 15%. And this is really a key piece when we're talking about CPACE. One of the documentation options provided in the regulations say that you can use CPACE projections for your CPACE project to actually be exempt from the tune-up if it meets that 15% threshold. You can also conduct an energy audit and implement all low, no-cost energy efficiency measures. Again, and this would all have to be done within 3 years of your tune-up deadline. Low site EUI would have to be demonstrated within the last 2 years if you want to be exempt through that pathway. And then Energy Star certification is really one of the main pathways that we foresee buildings trying to attain. This has to be done in the year preceding your compliance deadline. One thing I want to note, however, is that if you're a building that's complying in 2021 or 2022, we are accepting the 2019 Energy Star certifications because of uncertainties related to COVID. And then finally, we have demonstrated continuous commissioning or active optimization within buildings. And we basically need 1 year of reports demonstrating that, that you've been detecting faults and addressing them with in-house staff. Finally, I want to note here that we do provide extension opportunities to deadlines if folks want to try to pursue these high performance options. We're really trying to have as many buildings as possible go through these pathways. These see higher energy efficiency gains, so we want to promote them. So if you're pursuing the 15% energy savings, the ASHRAE audit, or greater or stricter, or working on implementing a continuous commissioning or active optimization program, you can actually apply for an extension to your deadline. I want to just touch briefly on this, which is that we define large portfolios in our legislation as 20 if an owner has 20 or more buildings or a cumulative floor area of 5 million square feet. Folks in this group actually have some unique options. They can submit a compliance plan to the Office of Sustainability that basically allows them to determine the deadlines for their buildings. The idea behind this is that they might have a lot of buildings in 1 year and fewer in another year. And so this allows them to smooth out their compliance over the 4-year compliance window. The other option for large portfolios is to use in-house staff as tune-up specialists, but there are quality insurance checks if they exceed 85% of square footage in their in-house inspections. Here's a timeline for year 1, just to give folks a sense. I think the really important thing here to note is that April 5th, 2021 timeline element, which is that if you want to apply for a high performance exemption, you actually have to provide documentation 6 months before the tune-up deadline. So that would be by April 5th for the 200,000 and greater cohort. Really important to note that the deadline itself is just for the tune-up report. So if you're performing a tune-up on your building, that's when you would have to deliver your report by. And then individuals that want to become tune-up specialists can apply at any point to have OOS review their credentials and give them approval to submit a report. And finally, just some key takeaways here that I want to leave you with. And one is that this is focused on operations and maintenance of existing systems. So we're not talking about building design. We're not talking about original construction. We're talking about how it's operated and maintained. And we're also not asking anything around implementing or installing new systems. So that goes to point 2, which is that this is not a requirement around capital improvements. However, we do, we do promote that. It is part of the high performance alternative pathways. And so, that's something that we really are looking for, but is not required if you're going the tune-up route. This policy does not also require a building to meet specific efficiency or energy use standards. In other cities, you're seeing a move towards building performance standards. We have to meet a certain level of energy use. This says nothing about that. If you're conducting a tune-up, we're not looking for you to track energy use between the tune-up and before and after the tune-up. You just have to complete the prescriptive list of actions. Fourth, we're here to help at OOS. We don't want to fine people. We want people to make their buildings more efficient. And the whole idea behind this is that it's supposed to be everyone wins. We're trying to increase tenant comfort, we're trying to reduce costs for building owners, and we're trying to reduce carbon emissions. And so, we've seen this policy work well in places like Seattle. We believe it has the ability to work well in Philadelphia, and really excited for implementation to begin. And for everyone that wants to be kept updated as we roll out resources over the coming weeks, I really encourage you to send an email to tuneups@phila.gov to get on our mailing list and just be aware of what's coming out. And so with that, I will turn it over to Dave.
Great. Thank you, Zach. Appreciate that. Let me share my screen. Yeah. We look good there? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about CPACE, the tune-up in Philadelphia, and a lot that's going on in the industry today as we look at sustainability and analytics are really kind of the top trends that we see in energy today. And it's really influencing the things that we do for today, for tomorrow. And it's all about an effort to obviously be energy efficient, control our costs, and improve in some cases, our cash flow as a building operations. And it's really through data and analytics that this is accomplished. So one of the things that I wanted to accomplish on my section of this is to just kind of give you some general framework of how you create that roadmap to compliance, how you look for partners to help you in some of the steps that you might want to consider when you're looking at the strategies that could be in front of you today. Obviously, energy and energy management is not a new topic, but some of the compliance things that will come your way might get you to change some of the thought process that might be required for the actions that you begin to find. So I thought it would be good to frame up just some simple things that we should understand. From an engineering standpoint, what we like to do is we always like to start with an ASHRAE level 1 walkthrough. The purpose of that is to try to minimize costs. A qualified certified energy management company or person like Pennoni, like myself, should be able to walk through a building, a level 1, and find those low-hanging fruits. Start to identify what type of building you are today. And we do that through a lot of different experience that we gained, obviously. We identify, are you a type A building, a type B, or a type C? And just, without going into a lot of details there, we look at those situations and are able to find some really quick low-hanging opportunities to couple with the long-term roadmap that you might have. So finding a no-cost entry point into how you become compliant with a long-term energy use and energy management strategy is really the goal. So getting that level 1 walkthrough, assess, are you a A-type building, a B-type building, and a C-type building? And just quickly, an A-type is really sophisticated, right? High performance, high compliance, capable of seeing all the data that they need, make management decisions in the real time, and have a control systems that's reactive to conditions. Type buildings B are close to that, have the sophistication and automation, but maybe aren't acting on it as aggressively as could be, given the types of tools that they have at their table. But the C-type buildings really lack everything. They can't see anything. They don't know what they're using on a real-time basis or even on an annual basis without looking at their invoices. So depending on where you fall is kind of where you want to start your roadmap and to figure out what are the best ways to become compliant. Once you get that level 1 understand with a certified partner that you use, then you move to the level 2 because you've identified some low cost opportunities that exist or some high efficiency returns on investment that exist that provide simple paybacks. And let's face it, in today's market, many organizations lack the data, the visibility, the use in understanding their energy use, their costs, let alone the ability to optimize things or control demand and measure and verify costs, their cost measurements and sustainability goals. So when you start to couple all of this together, it's really about finding those alternative methods of funding these projects, right? When they become identified. And that's what CPACE is about. It's an alternative funding source that gives you the ability to stretch that project over a longer period of time, improve your cash flow through the savings opportunities that are created. You achieve that objective really through a level 2 audit, which is a more intense audit, right? And so instead of just doing a walkthrough, we're really driving some key initiatives. Some of these areas that I think you should focus on in general are controls, lighting, chilled water, and then in general, optimizing on a continuous basis your building performance. So those 4 categories, if you're looking at those 4 categories, you're going to find opportunities that exist in your buildings today, just by looking at those 4 categories alone. Certainly there's more in building envelope, but these 4 main areas really give you a high return on your investment, and it gives you the ability to move forward at a cost-effective manner. One of the things that Pennoni does for a lot of our customers, and there's a lot of companies that are out there doing this today, a lot of customers, a lot of facilities in the Philadelphia area and surrounding cities are really looking at the continuous commissioning, and this is more for that high performance compliance option that might be available if you're a Class A or a Class B type building. And basically what we're trying to do through systems overlaying on top of your building automation controls is we want to take that operational, the design of the equipment that exists in the building and tighten it to your true load, right? On a continuous real-time basis. It's about understanding where your loads are today, now, and what's really truly needed. And if you can do that on a real-time hourly basis, you're going to achieve significant savings. Not only that, you're going to identify opportunities for the future for you to expand your energy sustainability goals and objectives. So as we go down this path of carbon reduction, energy efficiency, and maximizing the efficiency of our equipment and life cycle of our equipment, it's really about having a more real-time approach to it. Utilities Watch, which is a technology that we do, an analytics as a service type of process that we go through, provides that level of depth that you need on a real-time basis so that your operators, while they're doing other things, can be informed on where there might be some drifting occurring in the building, and they can take immediate action. And so that's really the purpose of having that overlaid system, right? And when you look at that high performance compliance requirement, that 1-year quarterly reports, this system's really going to give you that depth, right? It's this type of system's going to give you that real-time data point, time-stamped, so that when you're taking or seeing that drift occur and you take that immediate action, you can see the results of it. And you can start to quantify and qualify the value of the program that you have. That's really what the industry is striving to accomplish, is a system that allows you to really manage more the relationships and the business on an ongoing basis without having to spend operational time always looking at the data. The data is doing the work for you through a system. That's a very important aspect of building automation and building controls and optimization, is letting the system drive the analytics, letting the system drive what actions need to be taken. So as we move from building C to B and then ultimately to A, which is where we want everybody to kind of get to, there are nice cost-effective strategies to get there. They don't have to spend a bunch of money up front to achieve these objectives. And I really wanted to frame that out. But CPACE is, you know, a lot of our customers come to us and say, we need alternative CapEx to be able to achieve some of these things that we want to achieve and some of the things that we are being asked to achieve from an energy management perspective. And again, I can't emphasize enough the value of the PACE program and how it gives you that flexibility to extend a long-term approach to energy management in a cost-effective way. And I know we'll talk more depth about that later, but from an engineering standpoint and talking to customers and end users on a continuous basis, these are the types of conversations that are really critical to making that decision and that path forward is finding those alternative capital so that we don't have that CapEx exposure on a budget. So we've obviously executed a lot of energy management strategies. Company, we've been in business for over 50 years. So we have a lot of depth in working with a lot of customers in different markets. And as you look at the tune-up requirements in building system maintenance repairs, HVAC controls, lighting, domestic hot water and water use, and building envelope, there's a lot to tackle there. So building that roadmap in a prioritizing what's going to give you that best value is really critical, I think, for the future. This is an example of where continuous commissioning can really help you achieve great savings through minimized costs. So in this example that I'm showing you here, here's a 1 million square foot Class A office and retail facility. They are doing the continuous commissioning, so they're on that higher performance type situation. They have sophisticated building controls. They have set points and things that they're controlling on a real-time basis. So they install these things to monitor on a continuous basis, and what they're achieving is anywhere from $52,000 to $78,000 in savings per year by trying to manage demand and variable use. So controlling their equipment from spiking all at one time so that they can control their demand levels, and then also improving their efficiency so they can control the variable cost of their energy spend. And you want to attack both, right? And that's what continuous commissioning does. It says, I want to attack the variable cost that I have, and I want to attack the demand cost that I have. If I do both of those simultaneously, I'm really going to get a good bang for my buck. This is a good example of what continuous commissioning can do for you if you have that Class A type building. Just by way, Pennoni, we're the energy auditor for Miami-Dade County in Miami, which is a tall order. And similar to Philadelphia, they have challenges that are going on in their city. And again, not to really spend a lot of time, but I think it's really important that you do categorize yourself. Are we an A-type building, a B, or a C? They've put this program together, and it's really kind of an open program where the community can kind of come in and get guidance from the county, very similar to what's happening in Philadelphia. And they're going to be looking at those types of strategies, alternative PACE funding as well, so that they can execute some of their long-term goals and objectives. So reduce operating costs. The program we've put together here is assist with vulnerable neighbors, which is, I think, a really good, just a good thing to do in general, that there are some C buildings like churches that don't have high sophistication, but they want to be energy efficient as well. And so understanding, where you are, how to harvest the information that you need to harvest so that you can make the plan and the action. That's what this is all about. That's what my whole communication to you is about don't just run after something that's just a low-hanging fruit just because it's there. Let's prioritize those low-hanging fruit opportunities with other things so that you can get the bigger picture done in a shorter window, but leverage the available funds through PACE to make sure that we can finance this smartly. Case study we did here for a hospital. This was a lighting hospital, very sophisticated space, independent livers, people that are living there independently. We have nursing and we have assisted living, all under basically one roof. And we have folks that are suffering from Alzheimer's and dementia, and And so when you start to look at some of the strategies that you have to look at, innovation comes to play. There's a lot of different technology out there in the marketplace, and making the right decisions relative to technology is increasingly more important. And how to make those decisions is really important. And so for us in this particular example, project costs, give you a little background, project cost was about $100,000. We did lighting and controls. The annual project savings is $39,000. So that's how you get the ROI of 2.5 for years. But what we had to do here is really test the market in terms of what was available. We have patients that are sensitive to light intensity and light color, and we needed to automate that capability as they walk from room to room, that the room is adjusting to who is in that room and what their criteria are in terms of health and what they need to be able to be comfortable. And so when you start to look at controls and lighting, it's about the health and well-being of your patients. It's about giving them that comfort that they need. And so technology's out there to do these kind of things. PACE funding is really critical to be able to execute that, expand that out over a longer period of time and really get that cash flow so that you can provide, as a healthcare provider, they can provide better service to what they're doing, not spending money on energy, spending money on healthcare. So depending on what type of customer you are and depending on what type of building you are, your needs change, and prioritizing your needs in terms of how you manage energy and what your overall objectives are in terms of sustainability, whether it's unitized cost reduction, energy use reduction, CO2 reduction. It's really about putting all of these together in one single strategy that moves forward in a very, very organized and prioritized way. And at that point, I'm going to pause and turn it over to Stephen.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Steve Bevilacqua, and I am an analyst here at REVL Capital Group. REVL is a boutique investment bank headquartered here in Philadelphia, and we specialize in PACE financing. So quick background on PACE. PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy, and basically what it is it is a voluntary tax assessment that you place on your property in order to finance either new construction or a refurbishment or energy upgrades like we're talking about today. So some key benefits of the PACE program is that the program was meant to encourage property owners and real estate developers to use these energy efficient different products in these real estate projects. So everything that Dave just mentioned and that will go up in the tune-up bill will be eligible under the PACE program, such as HVAC, insulation, ventilation, windows. And so if you're looking to make upgrades to your property, one financing program that you can use is PACE. Some key benefits of the program is that, as Dave mentioned, the term of the loan can be up to the max useful life of all these upgrades that you're making. We see the useful life being typically for HVAC and all these different upgrades to be around 25 to 30 years. So we can extend that term up to that date. Also, if in new construction projects or these redevelopments, the first payment can be pushed back up to 2 years or up to the completion of the project, which it's a great benefit of the project or of the program. I'm sorry about that. So moving forward, a little background on PACE nationwide. PACE is the legislation is active in 37 states, and PACE is being funded in 22 of those. So there's active programs in 22. States, about $1.5 billion total has been funded so far in 2,400 total projects. And that has been calculated to create up to 18,000 jobs, which is great. So some nation leaders in terms of states are California, Ohio, and Connecticut. California was the first state to pass this program. But now we are seeing like key states up here in the Northeast activate their programs, which we're very excited about here in PA, especially Philadelphia, New York, Washington, DC, and Delaware, all recently approved their PACE programs. So we are excited to start working on projects here locally. As I mentioned, that the loan terms of PACE financing can go up to 25 or even 30 years if the useful life of the improvements meets that. Here at REVL Capital Group, we are financing these loans at very, very aggressive and aggressive interest rates. The property types of PACE loans can be pretty much anything besides multifamily. That's specifically in PA, we cannot fund projects for multifamily projects yet. Lisa, I'm sure Lisa will comment on that, but I believe that's being worked on in the legislation. So hopefully multifamily will be available soon. So I want to just take everybody through the process of getting a CPACE loan. Here's like the steps, but I think this next slide will be best. So if you're working on one of these tune-up projects that you have to meet the regulation for, we will be happy to help out and give you a quote for the financing, basically, as one alternative to pay for it. So if you decide that you're going to make these tune-up upgrades, please feel free to reach out and we can provide the quote. So basically, you come to us with the costs that you want to finance to make these tune-ups. We will basically size out your PACE loan and give you a quote on the interest rate. As I mentioned earlier, CPACE can cover 100% of these energy upgrades that you're making under this tune-up bill, which is awesome. So if you come to us with these upgrades and that you're making for the tune-up, we'll be happy to issue a term sheet for the financing. There are a few things that go into this that I would like to bring up. Number one, if you have a senior loan on the property, you need to get lender consent from that bank or capital provider. This is just because PACE is a voluntary tax assessment, so we just need to notify that lender that this tax assessment is being placed on the property. As soon as we get lender consent from the senior lender, we're pretty much ready to move forward and fund. So we will bring in a firm like Dave's for an energy audit, make sure everything is being compliant under the new tune-up bill and the PACE regulation, and then we will move forward and fund the deal. We can typically fund a PACE loan in 40 to 60 days, pretty quickly, as long as the property owner is ready to move forward with the project. So yeah, I have a few case studies as well. But one thing that I just really wanted to harp on here in Philadelphia is that we're excited to move forward with these projects, as the program just came live about a year ago. I believe Lisa's going to speak about the first project, but it just got done a few months ago, which is exciting. We're ready to move forward with this program and hopefully on some more deals. So Lisa, I can pass it on to you now. Here we go.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Steve, Dave, and Zach. I am about to share my screen here. Great. So again, thank you. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm with the Philadelphia Energy Authority. So you heard about CPACE from Steve just a few moments ago. So CPACE is now, it's a statewide, it had to be authorized at the state level, and then each county jurisdiction has to set up their own CPACE program. So Philadelphia's program was set up a year ago in October of 2019. And so as I said, each county needs to do their own program. So if you're from outside of Philadelphia, you can check to see if there's an active program in the county in which the building is that you're potentially interested in CPACE. But I'm going to be talking about the Philadelphia program for right now. So it has to be located in Philly. It has to be commercial and industrial only. As Steve mentioned, we are working to have the legislation amended to be able to add multifamily properties to eligible building types, hoping that could happen sometime in 2021. And also, as has been mentioned, you can do it for an existing building, which is really the primary focus of today's webinar, is upgrades to existing buildings, but it's also for new construction or gut rehab, and solar, which you can put on obviously any kind of building or any kind of property, and other renewables. And we have a long list of other renewables as well, but solar being the most common. So we did have the first deal in Pennsylvania, as well as in Philadelphia. The first two deals in Pennsylvania have been in Philly, and I'm excited to say that we're going to be announcing a third one next week, also in Philly. But the one that was our first one was a gut rehab project called J Central in the Harrogate, Kensington neighborhood in Philadelphia. And this is a project that is a little bit more complex because it is a multi-use property. And so what they had to do was to create a condo to separate out the property parcels for the commercial space, as well as and separate that from the multifamily space, because the CPACE was only able to be used for the commercial portion. So this was a $1.5 million project that financed the energy efficiency improvements and some water conservation improvements in this building that is under construction. And a little bit different again than existing buildings, but what we're finding is, and I'm sure Steve can speak to this as well, that there are a number of projects that are using CPACE to basically fill in their capital stack, and it's financing that's typically slightly better rates than your mezzanine debt or your or equity debt, and then of course you have the long terms that Stephen spoke about. But in this case, we were really excited that CPACE was used for development of this project. That's going to be a great addition to this neighborhood with nonprofits and new enterprise incubators and all sorts of cool things happening there. And we are now at the place where we're going to start to dig into some questions, and there were some already with us. And so I'm just going to leave up our names and contact information for just a moment. So if you want to reach out to any of us specifically, you can do that. But I also want to say, and I started putting this in the chat and I didn't quite have time to finish this. So we have Steve here representing one of the more than 20 capital providers that are currently registered to be a CPACE capital provider in Pennsylvania. So I'll share the link to the full. Oh, actually, I did that already. And Dave is here representing one of many qualified engineering firms. So by no means do you have to use Pennoni or Steve's firm, REVL Capital Group. We are very appreciative of them spending the time today to talk about this program, but we are not trying to endorse their firms in any way. So you can find other approved firms on our site, and our site is philadelphiacpace.org. So I'm just going to quick check to see if we have any questions in our chat right now. I think a couple of ones that came in early were already answered. So we have an excellent question. Is there variation between capital providers on interest rate? And is interest rate sometimes a deal breaker? So yes, there are variations in interest rate. And what we actually encourage people to do is to get term sheets from several capital providers so that they are able to compare the offerings. And I'm guessing they're going to be in a similar range, but you'll have to see if that's the case or not. And there are institutions where their cost of capital is generally lower than what they're going to get from CPACE. So this question was asking about universities and hospitals, and so in many cases they're not going to find CPACE to be competitive enough for them. So it depends on what type of building you have. What type of financial backing you have. For example, Brandywine is a large real estate company in this area, and they've said, you know what, CPACE isn't for us. We have better, more affordable costs, sources of capital for us. So this is if you're not in that kind of situation. And then we have another question here. Can CPACE be used for measures that reduce demand in utility bills, but not total energy use? No, it has to be. It's not just a flattening of your peak demand, but it has to be overall energy use reduction. So keep the questions coming in, and I have some for our panelists while we're waiting for more questions from you all. Zach, do you have a sense from your interactions with building owners, because I know that this has been many years in process and you've had many, many individual conversations as well as group sessions. Do you have any sense as to whether the buildings are more likely to use tune-up and improve their operational efficiency, or if they're likely to use an alternative compliance path that you talked about?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think we're definitely going to see a mix. We know from our benchmarking data kind of where buildings are right now. We know that, there are some that will meet that Energy Star threshold. We know that there are some that have been undertaking retrofits in recent years, but we do expect a lot of buildings to go through this tune-up process and use that. Given how prescriptive it is, given some more of the certainties around that, that will be a chosen path for many, especially as we get into the smaller buildings that might have the same access to capital that we're talking about, before something like CPACE became available. So especially as we get into the later years of the first compliance cycle, I expect more and more buildings to pursue the tune-up method. And just one thing I wanted to note that has been coming up in the chat a lot is around the resources to do things like apply to become a tune-up specialist, or to have information about how to apply for exemption, or even just the tune-up webpage. All of those will be launching by mid-November, hopefully. So stay tuned. And again, send an email to tuneups@phila.gov, which some of you already have, and I'll make sure that everyone's notified when that happens.
Great. Thanks, Zach. There's a question about whether nonprofits are eligible to use CPACE, and the answer is definitely yes. Even though CPACE works similarly to a tax assessment on a property, it doesn't matter whether you are paying property taxes or not. Nonprofits are eligible. Government buildings are not, but nonprofits are. I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. So I'm going to continue asking a few questions. Dave and/or Zach, can you talk about what the range of cost is to perform a tune-up? Obviously, you're going to get some really fast payback, but there is some upfront cost. And can you talk a little about that?
I can speak to it first, Dave, if that's okay, just based on so the city actually conducted a tune-up on its juvenile justice center. Based on that, the cost was about, I think, 8 cents per square foot to tune up, and it ended up leading to about 15 cents per square foot of savings. So with an expected savings about $24,000 annually. We know that it's going to vary building to building and depending on the contractor, but we see this as being something where there is a really quick payback and then ongoing annual savings. So it might be a little bit more upfront cost, but that savings will be there in the long run. but Dave, I'd be interested here too, what you would see this being based on your experience with audits and other similar types of assessment.
Well, I think that's, it's a good question because it gets to the point of, how do you do an ASHRAE 1, ASHRAE 2? How do you combine those? The reason why I brought both of those into the conversation is part of our process, and I think a good qualified person will look at that level 1 first and in a sense find where there might be some cost-effective strategies to kind of bring into that level 2 so they can kind of focus on what they want to focus on in that level 2. That's the purpose of the level 1, is to say, hey, I think there's a really good opportunity in chilled water. I think there's a good opportunity in lighting. Let's use our level 2 to focus there and maximize the return on our tune-up strategy. So I think in general, I'd be in the same ballpark, in terms of dollars, but it really does depend on the level of sophistication you get into here. If you have I'll give you a really good example of a pharmaceutical that had a Class A building, so totally automated. It was about a $60,000 expense for them to upgrade and optimize their facility for a $350,000 annual savings. So a less than 1 year payback on maximizing the performance of their building automation controls. So you're going to run into a lot of different scenarios, but that's depending on where you are. I don't disagree with your range in dollars, but I think that's really why, Lisa, I said level 1 first. Use that level 1 to find what the level 2 can bring, and that can help the customer save money.
That's great. Thank you. Steve, you mentioned the lender consent. Can you go into that in a little bit more detail? Why is it there? Is it easy or hard to get? Because that's one of the questions we hear most often about the senior lender consent.
Yeah, absolutely. So why is it there? It's there because you're placing this voluntary tax assessment on the property. So to kind of unravel that a little bit, the tax payment or the PACE payment, as it is technically part of your tax payment, it's added on top and collected through the local municipality. That annual payment is technically senior to your bank loan. So you need to notify your senior lender, say, hey, I'm putting this tax assessment, PACE assessment on my property, and they just need to sign off on it. It is easy to get, and there are some just standard forms that local PACE administrators put together that you can just send over to your senior lender. And also, if they don't really know too much about the PACE program, your capital provider I'm sure will be happy to just hop on a quick phone call, explain the program, explain PACE, how it works, and they most likely will give the senior consent. There are a number of local banks in the area who I have seen work with PACE projects in the past. They are familiar with the program, and they will give consent to PACE. So.
That's great. Thanks very much. Zach, I wonder if you could talk about it, besides the timing changes that resulted from the regulation hearing process. Are there any other major changes? Like if people were aware of the regulations in its earlier iterations, is there anything else that's really different that people might want to know about?
Yeah, I would say that the most significant changes were the ones around the timing. So providing that extension, the 6-month extension to the 200,000 square foot buildings, and also, providing the opportunity to use the Energy Star score from 2019 if your compliance deadline is 2021 or 2022. I would say that the other major changes are around some of the alternative pathway options. So one was we reduced the required documentation requirements for active optimization and continuous commissioning, both in terms of what you would need to provide and the time period over which you would need to demonstrate that your continuous commissioning or active optimization has actually been functioning. So that we hope that will be both an incentive to to start those programs in your building, but also, recognizing that we don't necessarily need all the data that we were originally requesting in the initial regs. The other piece of the alternative compliance that changed was we originally had an opportunity to be exempt if you had 100% of your energy coming through renewable sources. We removed that because of strong objections, because this is more of an efficiency, energy efficiency program than it is a renewable energy program. And so, we heard that loud and clear, and we struck that from the options. So those were the really kind of significant changes in the compliance options that we saw. Beyond that, just some language tweaks to make sure things were more concise and clear, but nothing else that would have significant effects on folks that had to comply.
Great, excellent. There was a question earlier from Ken about the fact that, with COVID, there's some changes in how buildings are operating. And I just wanted to take a moment to promote another webinar we're having next week on November 10th at 8:30 a.m. for the early risers, as opposed to the midday folks. And that the emphasis, the focus on that webinar is about COVID protection measures and energy efficiency. And can you have both? And the short answer is kind of. So come here the whole hour about can you safely protect your occupants from pathogens and also still be energy efficient. I think I can say that early on there was a lot of guidance about just bring as much outside air into your building as possible, and people are refining that and the recommendations are as I said, a little bit different now. But please join us next week if you can, and it's up on our the link is on our website at philadelphiacpace.org. And I know there's one more question in the queue here. But before we answer that, I just want to see if any of our panelists have any last statements they want to make or answer some questions I didn't have a chance to give them an opportunity to answer.
Just following up on that last point, Lisa, is that the building energy performance policy is flexible to changing requirements kind of that are set down as standards from CDC, ASHRAE. We're meant to have buildings operate as they should be, and that includes, doing things to protect the health and safety of the occupants. And so, we're flexible about that, but then we know that these things change over time, and that's where the tune-ups come in to make sure that you're realigning your systems with whatever is kind of, at the forefront of operations at that time. So that's all I would add on.
Okay, that's great. We actually are out of time, but I know that there was a question the last question was for Dave. Feel free to reach out to him directly, and feel free to reach out to any of us directly. If you weren't able to capture our names and contact info, we will be providing the slide decks to you at some point and soon, and I'll be sure to include contact info. So thank you all very much. And if we had a poll on here, I would have asked how many times an hour are you checking the news, election news? But I can tell you that I've just spent an entire hour and I didn't check. And I don't know if we have a new president yet or not, but probably not. I think we would have had some phones buzzing. So hang in there, everybody. Try not to be as distracted as I am, and see you again soon.
Thanks, Lisa.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.